systems from Atari. Have you played Atari today?
No other bed can do that as well as a Big Sur waterbed.
E-Guide, with the most complete listings, expanding cable coverage.
Wood-paneled televisions, neon shorts, and commercials that made no sense. Funny things from the 1980s were just everyday life. But looking back now, were we all in on the joke, or did we never realize how strange it really was? Over-the-top hairdos in the 1980s were less about style and more about spectacle. To get that perfect towering poof or side-swept shell, you needed a can of hairspray in one hand and a teasing comb in the other. Some mornings, the bathroom turned into a construction site. Hair was sprayed, scrunched, fluffed, and frozen into place like a sculpture that dared not move. Mousse was slathered on like sunscreen, followed by heat from a curling iron so hot it could leave permanent dents in your bangs. It was a daily battle between gravity and vanity usually won. The bigger the hair, the closer to cool. Class photos from the decade show clouds of bangs, mile-high ponytails, and helmets of blonde that could survive a wind tunnel. Everyone walked around smelling faintly of aerosol. Some kids were practically flammable, but at the time, it was worth it. You judged your popularity by the size of your bangs. A flat head was social suicide. Looking back now, it seems absurd, but for those who lived it, there was no higher compliment than being told your hair looked totally rad. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special. But for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it, but they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time, they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow, that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them, others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. Boombox battles turned sidewalks into stages and backpacks into speaker cabinets. In the 1980s, carrying a massive boombox on your shoulder was more than a way to listen to music. It was a declaration. You had style, you had taste, and you had batteries heavy enough to power a small city block. These machines blasted everything from hip-hop to hair metal, and they did not ask for permission. You walked down the street with your soundtrack trailing behind you, volume all the way up, head nodding to the beat. Some kids parked them at basketball courts. Others lined them up outside corner stores. Whoever had the best bass usually won the crowd. Tapes were traded, dials were turned, And sometimes spontaneous dance-offs broke out right there on the pavement. Boomboxes were heavy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. But in a time before smartphones and Bluetooth, they were portable pride. They made noise. They made statements. And if you saw someone approach with a fresh cassette in hand and a boombox on their shoulder, you knew something good was about to happen. Boombox battles were not just about the music. They were about being seen, heard, and remembered. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music. They were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. Neon everything was not a trend. It was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle. It was not sophisticated. But it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. Trapper Keepers were not just school supplies, they were status symbols. With their Velcro flaps and glossy, over-the-top covers, they turned every classroom into a silent competition of who had the coolest binder. Some featured racing cars. Others showed rainbows, unicorns, or abstract laser patterns straight out of a sci-fi fever dream. Inside, everything was neatly organized. Folders, dividers, loose-leaf paper, and secret notes passed during math class. The Velcro made a loud rip every time you opened it, an announcement that learning was about to begin, or at least be attempted. Trapper Keepers made you feel like you had your life together, even if your grades said otherwise. Teachers had a love-hate relationship with them. They were bulky, distracting, but undeniably effective at keeping your stuff in one place. And if you had one with a matching pencil case, you were royalty. Years later, people still remember the smell of the plastic, the feel of flipping through those laminated folders, and the thrill of sliding in a new pack of notebook paper. Trapper Keepers were not just for school, they were for showing off, staying organized, and feeling like you had a little piece of the future in your backpack. Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad, or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn, if it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends, you collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones: root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did. And then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to third grade with a smile. Waterbeds promised the future and delivered waves of regret. On paper, they were perfect, a heated mattress that cradled your body like a floating dream. But in practice, not so much. Every turn sent ripples across the surface. You tried to roll over, and the whole bed sloshed like a bathtub during an earthquake. Getting in without making a tidal wave was a skill. Getting out without sliding to the floor was an Olympic event. They were heavy, hard to move, and leaked at the worst times, usually at 3 in the morning, soaking everything from socks to shag carpet. Still, they were trendy. If someone had a waterbed, it meant they were either incredibly cool or easily convinced by an in-store demo. Some people swore by them. Others swore at them. Pets hated them. Kids loved jumping on them until they learned that waterbeds and sharp objects do not mix. But for a brief, glorious window in the 1980s, having a waterbed meant you had arrived. It was furniture and flex all in one. Looking back, they were impractical, ridiculous, and unforgettable. And somewhere, in a dusty corner of a basement, one is still gently sloshing, waiting for its comeback. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears, 2 shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there! Do not move!" and you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. Cabbage Patch Kid frenzy turned toy stores into battlegrounds. These soft-bodied dolls with unique, slightly odd faces were the must-have gift of the 1980s. Each one came with a birth certificate and adoption papers, making it feel like you were bringing home a real baby. But getting your hands on one? That was another story. Parents lined up at dawn. Some camped overnight. Others sprinted through department stores in scenes more suited to action movies than holiday shopping. There were arguments, tears, the occasional tackle, and when someone finally scored a doll, they clutched it like it was made of gold. Kids loved them. They named them, dressed them, and carried them everywhere. Some families had to settle for knockoffs with names like Garden Patch Pals that never quite felt the same. But if you had a real one, you were a legend. Looking back, it seems wild that a doll caused so much chaos. But in that moment, nothing mattered more. Cabbage Patch Kids were not just toys. They were trophies. Proof that your parents had braved the crowds and won. And decades later, those round faces still sit on shelves, quietly remembering the madness they caused. VHS rental adventures were more than just picking a movie. They were the night's main event. You walked into the store greeted by rows of clamshell cases, each one shouting for your attention with over-the-top artwork and dramatic taglines. New releases lined the front wall, but they were often already rented, marked by empty plastic holders and your own growing disappointment. So you wandered. Comedy? Horror? Something animated for your little brother? You judged movies by their cover. You flipped tapes to read the backs, squinted at blurry screenshots, and made last-minute switches at checkout. There was pressure. Choose wisely. You had this movie for 2 nights, maybe 3. Forget to rewind? Expect a fee. Some stores even had a "Be Kind Rewind" sign that became a national motto. You got home, made popcorn, and watched together as a family. The sound of the tape sliding into the VCR meant it was officially movie night. VHS rentals turned average evenings into little adventures. They made choosing a movie feel like a quest. And even though we stream everything now, nothing beats the charm of browsing those old shelves and hoping your top pick had not been snatched first. Rubik's Cubes sat on coffee tables like miniature monuments to frustration. Their colorful sides promised fun, but more often delivered rage. You twisted, you turned, you thought you had it, and then disaster. One wrong move sent you back to square one. Solving it became a badge of honor. If someone at school could actually complete a Rubik's Cube, they were treated like a genius. Crowds gathered, applause broke out, but most of us faked it. We peeled off the stickers and rearranged them to make it look solved, or we popped out the pieces and snapped them back into place. Technically cheating? Maybe. Spiritually rewarding? Absolutely. There were books, guides, even videos explaining how to beat the cube, but few had the patience. And yet, we all kept trying. Rubik's Cubes lived in junk drawers, backpacks, and classroom desks. They were part toy, part puzzle, part stress test. Looking back, they were frustrating, addictive, and completely iconic. And to this day, if you spot one on a shelf, your hands remember the rhythm of twist, turn, twist, even if your brain still has no idea how to actually solve it. Leg warmers were a fashion miracle, pointless and perfect all at once. Originally designed for dancers to keep their muscles warm, they jumped out of the studio and into the mainstream thanks to aerobics videos and pop culture icons. Suddenly, everyone was wearing them, over tights, over jeans, even over bare legs. They came in neon, in stripes, in fluffy pastels. Some matched outfits, others clashed proudly. And they served no actual purpose unless you were stretching at a bar or leaping across a dance floor. But no one cared. Leg warmers made you feel like you were part of something glamorous and athletic, even if the closest you got to working out was lifting a hairbrush to lip sync in the mirror. Schools were filled with rows of students rocking scrunched-up fabric around their shins. Some slouched them just above the ankle. Others pulled them high like woolly socks from the future. They were soft, they were cozy, and they were everywhere. Looking back, they might seem silly, but they were fun, expressive, and totally 1980s. And for a few years, they made everyone feel like a star in their own low-budget dance movie. Television Guide was the original streaming schedule, printed, folded, and worshipped. Each week, families flipped through its pages to plan their entire viewing life. What time is your show on? What channel is the big movie airing? Without a television guide, you were lost in the static. It listed every program, from early morning cartoons to late-night reruns. You circled shows in pen. You memorized time slots. You argued with siblings over what to watch and when. Sometimes you even set a timer on the VCR to record your favorites, if you could figure out how. Television Guide came with featured articles, behind-the-scenes trivia, and occasionally a glossy cover that made you feel like you were holding something special. It was not just a magazine, it was a map, a lifeline, and a reminder that missing your show meant waiting until summer reruns or, gasp, never seeing it again. Kids today will never understand the pressure of being ready at exactly 7 o'clock, or the heartbreak of flipping the page and realizing your favorite show was preempted by a holiday parade. The Television Guide was small, simple, and essential, and in a world before scrolling, it helped us find our way through the glow of the living room screen. Atari gaming sessions were pixelated magic. You plugged in a cartridge, gripped a joystick, and entered a world made of blinking squares and bleeping sounds. The graphics were basic, the controls were stiff, and yet you were hooked. Pong, Frogger, Space Invaders. Each game was a challenge, a test of reflexes and patience. You played alone, with friends, or against your sibling for hours. The television hummed, the screen flickered, the joystick squeaked under the weight of your determination. Games froze, scores reset. But the fun never stopped. Atari brought the arcade home, turning dens and basements into battlegrounds of bragging rights. There were no saves, no checkpoints, just you and your ability to last longer than your last game. Every win felt epic, every loss felt personal. And if the cartridge did not load, you took it out, blew into it like a sacred ritual, and tried again. Atari gaming was simple, frustrating, and unforgettable. It was not about the graphics, it was about the experience. And for those who held that joystick and battled blinking enemies, those early games are etched in memory. Proof that sometimes a bouncing square was all it took to feel like a hero. Payphone predicaments were a daily part of life before everyone had a phone in their pocket. You needed a quarter, maybe two, and a working booth to make a call. No signal bars, no group texts, just a heavy receiver, a scratchy dial tone, and sometimes a sticky keypad. Finding a payphone that was not broken or graffitied felt like a small miracle. If you were lucky, it worked on the first try. If not, you banged the receiver, tried again, and hoped your coins did not disappear into the void. Making a collect call meant saying your name faster than humanly possible. "Hello, mother, please pick me up right now," before the machine cut you off. Privacy was non-existent. Everyone could hear your conversation. Rain? You ducked into the booth and hoped it did not smell like sadness and cigarette smoke. Nighttime? Good luck. The glow of the payphone sign was a lonely beacon, but it was all we had. We memorized numbers. We waited in line. We scrounged for change in pockets and glove compartments, and when the call finally went through, it felt like a victory. Payphones were clunky, inconvenient, and unreliable. But they were also our lifeline, 1 quarter at a time. Roller rink socials were where friendships formed, crushes blossomed, and fashion collided with fluorescent lighting. Every weekend, kids flocked to the local rink like it was the hottest club in town. You laced up rental skates that never quite fit, wobbled onto the floor, and tried not to fall in front of your classmates. The music blared, everything from Madonna to Michael Jackson, and the lights spun in pinks, blues, and greens. Couples held hands during the slow skate. Kids showed off their best moves during the speed rounds. And when you got tired, you grabbed a slice of cardboard-flavored pizza or a snow cone that turned your tongue electric blue. The carpet was hideous, the lockers never worked, but the vibe? Unbeatable. Roller rinks were more than entertainment. They were a rite of passage. You had your first dance there, your first bruise, maybe even your first kiss, awkward and giggly behind the concession stand. Parents watched from the sidelines or dropped you off with a reminder to call from the payphone. The rink was loud, sticky, and chaotic, and yet it was magic. Even now, the smell of rental skates and popcorn grease brings it all back in one wheeled rush. Desktop computer novelties were bulky, beige, and filled with possibilities. When a family brought home their first computer, it felt like inviting the future into the living room. The machine took up half the desk and made strange sounds when booting up, clicks, whirs, and beeps that signaled you were entering another world. Monitors were deep enough to qualify as furniture. The keyboard was loud, and the mouse had a rubber ball inside that collected lint like a magnet. Most people did not know what to do with them beyond opening word processors and playing games like Solitaire or Snake. But that was enough. You typed slowly, saving everything to floppy disks the size of your hand, praying they would not corrupt. The printer was louder than a lawnmower and took a full minute to spit out a single page. You bragged about your desktop like it was a new car. Friends came over just to look at it. You made banners with your name in pixelated fonts and felt like a genius. Desktop computers were clunky, confusing, and incredibly slow. But back then, they were windows into something bigger. And even when they froze, they still made you feel like the smartest house on the block. Fashion layering experiments in the 1980s were less about logic and more about volume. You started with a base, maybe a turtleneck. Then you added a sweater, then a vest, maybe a blazer on top. Why? Because more was more. Scarves were optional, belts were mandatory. Jewelry? Yes, all of it. You wore 2 pairs of socks, scrunched perfectly over leggings tucked into boots. Hats inside? No problem. Fingerless gloves with bangles? Absolutely. It did not have to match. In fact, it was cooler if it did not. You looked like a walking closet explosion, and you owned it. The goal was not subtlety. The goal was layers. Warmth was a bonus, but style came first. Some outfits weighed more than a small dog. Some made it impossible to bend your arms. But in the mirror, you saw confidence. You saw edge. You saw someone ready to make an entrance even if it was just down the school hallway. Looking back, the combinations were questionable, but the spirit behind them? Pure creativity. Fashion in the 1980s did not whisper. It shouted, boldly, loudly, and with 7 visible layers. DIY haircuts were a gamble most families took at least once, and usually regretted. With no YouTube tutorials or professional scissors, someone at home decided they could just trim it a little. What followed was part haircut, part identity crisis. A kitchen chair became the salon throne. A towel around your shoulders caught the clippings. And your tears. Bangs were the first to go, hacked straight across like a lawnmower had passed through. One side was always shorter. The back was ignored. And when it was finally done, you stared into the mirror wondering who let this happen. Sometimes it was mom. Sometimes it was your older sister. Once in a while, you tried doing it yourself, armed with safety scissors and too much confidence. School the next day felt like a walk of shame. Hats became your best friend. Friends pretended not to notice. But deep down, they knew, and they remembered. Everyone has at least one photo of a haircut gone wrong, crooked, uneven, or alarmingly short. It was a rite of passage, a test of patience, a bold act of trust. DIY haircuts were terrifying, hilarious, and unforgettable. And somehow, some way, the hair always grew back. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut. Do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. Halloween in the 1970s was not a trip to a pop-up shop for a $30 superhero suit. It was a challenge, a test of creativity, a race to see who could turn a cardboard box and some tinfoil into a full-blown astronaut helmet or a robot torso. You begged your parents for old clothes, rummaged through closets for anything with a weird texture, and repurposed kitchen utensils into alien antennas. And then there were the masks. You know the ones. Thin plastic with elastic bands that snapped after 2 wears, tiny eye holes that never lined up with your face, and a mouth slit so small you could not breathe without fogging up the inside. But still, when it came time to trick or treat, you felt invincible. You became someone else. There was pride in a homemade costume. Nobody else on the block had it. You made it, with your own hands, or with your parents' help after dinner. And if your costume got torn or the rain made the paint run, you just kept going. Candy was candy, rain or shine, store-bought or not. But if you really wanted to earn something sweet, and not just from a pillowcase haul, you had to do a little hustling of your own. That meant going door to door, not for candy, but for glass bottles. Before Fandango or streaming apps told us what was playing, there was the operator. And calling the theater was an event in itself. You would dial a number, usually a long one, and wait as a robotic voice or sometimes an actual person listed off every movie and showtime like it was the State of the Union. Showtimes for the weekend of July 24th: Gremlins at 7:30, The Goonies at 9:15, Ghostbusters at 10:45. You could not skip ahead. You had to listen carefully, and maybe even write it down if you were planning a big night. If someone in the house picked up the phone while you were listening, forget it. You had to start over. And if you called during a busy hour, good luck hearing anything over the static and background noise. But it was still exciting. The build-up, the anticipation. You felt like you were about to join something important, something bigger than yourself. Because back then, watching a movie meant going somewhere. It meant tickets, seats, sticky floors, and that one kid who always threw popcorn. It meant magic. But if you wanted movie magic at home, you did not need a theater. You just needed to clear your schedule, grab the good blanket, and stake your claim on the couch. Back in the days when phones had cords and privacy was a privilege, every hallway had a throne, and it was called the gossip bench. This was not just a chair. It was a hybrid masterpiece, a small wooden seat attached to a side table, designed specifically for long, dramatic phone calls. These benches were often placed right by the hallway phone nook, and if you were a teenager in the 1960s or 1970s, this was your favorite spot in the house. You would sit there for hours, twirling the phone cord, whispering about crushes, repeating, "No, you hang up," while your siblings paced in the background waiting for their turn. Some benches had a little drawer for pens and paper. Others had cushions and floral fabric, showing just how serious folks were about comfort during those marathon chats. It was furniture that served one purpose: conversation. But as phones got smaller, and then wireless, and then fit in your pocket, the gossip bench faded away. Today, they are vintage novelties. Back then, they were the nerve center of the household. And while you chatted away about school dances or new neighbors, something else might have been happening overhead. Quietly, from the ceiling, playing your favorite song. Imagine this. It is Sunday morning. You are eating breakfast, and faintly from above your head comes the sweet hum of big band music or the evening news. Reliance on government assistance programs was not a choice. It was the only way to get by. Food stamps came in paper booklets, torn out in the checkout line with quiet hands and sideways glances. School lunches were free, but they came with their own kind of price. Standing in a separate line, hearing the whispers, seeing the looks. You carried a different card, a different meal, a different kind of burden. The people behind the counter never said anything, but you knew. Everyone knew. At home, government cheese filled the fridge. Powdered milk sat on the shelf. The pantry was stocked with cans stamped from surplus stores, beans, peanut butter, cereal that tasted like cardboard but kept you full. Your parents made it stretch, they made it work, and they told you to hold your head up even when you wished you could vanish. Because pride does not feed a family. Assistance was not shameful, it was survival. It was how your shoes fit, how your stomach was full, how you still made it to class with something in your bag. And though some days it felt heavy, it also meant someone, somewhere, knew you were worth helping. Even when the world made you forget. Going to the gas station used to be fun. I am not even kidding. In the 1970s, pulling into a station was not just about filling up the tank, it was about what you got for free. Gas station giveaways were the absolute jackpot of roadside errands. You would get real glassware, like full-on drinking glasses with cartoon characters or sports team logos printed on them. There were dishes, figurines, tiny toys, even aluminum tumblers in wild colors. Some stations had full sets you could collect over time, which meant every gas stop felt like you were unlocking a new piece in the puzzle. Parents would even choose where to fill up based on who had the best freebies that week. And kids? We kept track. We knew which stations had the cool tumblers and which ones were slacking. Sometimes they even gave out trading stamps to go along with your haul, so it was a 2-for-1 deal. You might not remember the cost of gas back then, but you definitely remember that little thrill when the attendant handed over your freebie through the car window. It was like a tiny prize for just living life. But if you think that was exciting, wait until you hear about the one thing that made kids count down the days from summer to winter, flipping through pages and circling dreams. Making a mixtape in the 1980s was not just about the music, it was about what the music meant. This was not a playlist you could throw together in 5 minutes. This was a curated collection of feelings, carefully selected for maximum emotional impact. Every track had a purpose. Every order was intentional. You did not just make mixtapes for yourself. You made them for friends, for crushes, for breakups, for birthdays, for sitting in your room, staring at the ceiling, thinking deep thoughts you had no business thinking at that age. You would spend hours hitting pause and record, rewinding to check the transition, trying to fit exactly the right number of songs on each side without cutting one off too soon. There was a science to it, a rhythm, a philosophy, and then came the cover art. Doodles, stickers, fake band logos, scribbled lyrics, little hearts and broken hearts. The label on a mixtape said everything about who you were or who you wanted to be. These tapes were gifts, time capsules, emotional resumes. You gave one to someone and it meant something. It meant a lot. But if you did not have the patience or just wanted to cheat the system a little, you could always get a dozen albums for the price of a gumball. Almost. You would toss it in and forget about it. That was the beauty of the laundry chute. A small hatch built right into the hallway wall or bathroom cabinet, leading straight down into a hamper, or sometimes directly into the basement laundry room. Just open, drop, and go. These vertical passageways were like magic portals for dirty socks and sweaty gym clothes. No more lugging baskets down 2 flights. No more arguments about whose turn it was. You just lifted the flap and let gravity do the work. Kids treated them like secret tunnels. Parents treated them like a godsend. But like many good things, laundry chutes eventually went out of style. Safety concerns popped up, especially with young kids and pets. And then there was the fire risk, as an open shaft could let smoke and flames move between floors. Add in the rise of compact laundry machines on upper levels, and suddenly the chute became obsolete. But admit it, there is still something satisfying about the idea of chucking a shirt through the wall. And speaking of walls, wait until you hear about the windows that were not exactly windows. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon. A dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did. Kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked. Sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughs, but most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened, but everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back, groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the too short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. Paper routes were the ultimate crash course in growing up. It was not just a side gig. It was a rite of passage. You would get up before the sun, sometimes before your parents were even awake, pull on your jacket, and head out with that thick canvas shoulder bag that nearly dragged on the ground. The newspapers were heavy, especially on Sundays. You would roll and rubber band them the night before, or as you went, if you were brave. There was a rhythm to it. Walking house to house, tossing them just right so they landed near the door but not in the bushes. You knew which neighbors tipped, which ones complained, and which ones pretended they were not home when it came time to collect. And that was the part no one warned you about, the collection. You had to knock on doors, smile politely, and ask for your money. It was awkward. It was humbling. But it made you feel grown. You earned something. And if you saved up enough, you could finally buy that thing you had been eyeing for months. A new bike, a radio, or maybe a toy. But not just any toy. We are talking about the weirdest, creepiest, most unforgettable toy of the era. One with disguises, glue-on features, and a face you could never forget. Let's talk about Hugo, Man of a Thousand Faces. Saturday morning cartoons were not just shows. They were rituals. You would wake up at 6 or 7, bowl of cereal in hand, and stake out your spot in front of the television before anyone else in the house even stirred, pajamas still on, eyes still half shut. But you were ready. The networks fought hard for your attention. ABC, NBC, CBS, they all rolled out animated powerhouses like The Smurfs, He-Man, The Real Ghostbusters, Jem, G.I. Joe, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each show had its slot, and missing one felt like missing a holiday. But for every golden episode came the heartbreak of your favorite show being bumped, or worse, replaced. The dreaded special news report could interrupt your flow like a slap to the face. You would sit there in disbelief as your cartoon got pulled for a political debate or weather update. No warnings, no mercy. Still, the lineup gave you something to look forward to all week, and for those few hours, everything felt right in the world. Cartoons, cereal, and commercials that somehow got stuck in your head forever. Because let's be honest, there are still jingles from that era that we can sing from memory, word for word. It looked like a cabinet, just a little rectangle in the wall with a tiny knob. But open it up and suddenly you had an ironing board swinging down like a Murphy bed for your clothes. Fold-out ironing boards in the wall were the peak of space-saving genius. These things were especially popular in mid-century homes, when every inch of space had to count. The board folded out flat, usually right next to the laundry area or inside the kitchen pantry. You did not have to drag a heavy metal contraption from the closet. Just pop it open, plug in the iron, and get to work. Some even had a tiny shelf or built-in plug to hold the iron itself, along with a little light above the board. Now that was fancy. Housewives adored these because they made chores quicker. And let's face it, they just looked slick. Like the house was in on the secret with you. Eventually, though, as trends moved toward larger laundry rooms and portable everything, these ironing stations disappeared. But for the folks who grew up with one, there is a real nostalgia there. It was like opening a secret door into domestic life. Now, speaking of secret doors, the next one was not about cleaning your shirt. It was about making sure your closet smelled like the forest. Limited or no air conditioning meant summer nights were a battle with the heat. The box fan sat in the window, humming like a tired engine, barely moving the thick air. You sweated through your sheets, drank warm water, slept with the lights off and the windows wide open, hoping for a breeze that never came. Some homes had one window unit, and it stayed in the living room. Everyone gathered there like refugees from the sun. No one moved. The couch was soaked in humidity. Tempers flared, ice trays emptied fast. You wore as little as possible, stuck your head in the fridge, and counted the hours until dark. At school, kids talked about central air. You could not imagine it. The idea of a whole house being cool felt like science fiction. You made popsicles out of juice in ice cube trays. You wrapped wet washcloths around your neck. You laid on the floor, hoping the tile was cooler than the bed. And through it all, you survived. Uncomfortable, sticky, and half asleep, but alive. No air conditioning was not ideal, but it made you tough, and it taught you how to endure heat, not just in your house, but in life. That high-pitched tone, you remember it. You might even feel it in your chest right now. The emergency broadcast system test did not care what you were doing. It took over everything. You could be watching your favorite cartoon, a family sitcom, or a game show with flashing lights, and suddenly the screen would freeze, a gray static box would appear, and that bone-chilling noise would wail through the speakers. Then came the voice, always monotone, always distant. This is a test. This is only a test. Even though they told you it was just a drill, it still felt like the end of the world was knocking. You sat still, stared at the screen, and waited for it to go away. Some kids covered their ears, others ran to find a parent. It was spooky in a way you could not explain. You did not know what nuclear war was, not really, but you knew this test meant something big, something adult, something terrifying. After a minute or two, it would vanish, and the show would come back on like nothing happened. But you felt different. That noise lived in your bones. Still, once the fear passed, you went back to being a kid. And in the 1970s, being a kid meant making your own fun, sometimes by putting on a show right in your backyard. Commercial jingles in the 1980s were not just background noise. They were the soundtrack of your childhood. Short, catchy, and borderline hypnotic. From "I do not want to grow up, I am a Toys R Us kid" to my buddy, wherever I go, he goes." These little songs became national earworms. You knew the tune before you even understood the product. And even now, decades later, you probably remember all the lyrics without trying. Fast food chains, toys, theme songs for cereal, they all knew how to brand themselves right into your brain. And we loved it. These were not just ads. They were pop culture. Kids would sing them on the playground like they were chart-topping hits. Some even had dance routines. And the best ones? They felt like a little burst of joy in between the shows you came to watch. It was marketing, sure, but it was also magic. A 30-second clip that made you beg your parents for action figures, Happy Meals, or the latest sugary snack with a weird mascot. And yes, even today, if you hear the opening note of gimme a break," you know exactly what is coming. But when it came to making your own mix of hits, that required serious patience and a strong dislike for chatty radio DJs. Let us talk about the rumpus room. If the living room was where adults behaved themselves, the rumpus room was where the kids got wild. Usually tucked away in the basement, this was the unofficial playground of every suburban household from the 1950s to the 1970s. Carpeted in wall-to-wall shag, lit by lava lamps, and often filled with beanbag chairs, dartboards, and mismatched furniture, the rumpus room was every child's dream and every parent's secret weapon. You could send the kids down there for hours, let them roughhouse, make noise, and burn off all that energy while the grown-ups enjoyed some blessed peace upstairs. It was not about looking nice, it was about cutting loose. Some had jukeboxes, others had board games stacked to the ceiling, and every now and then, you would find a couch that doubled as a trampoline. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Over time, the idea faded as homes got bigger and open concepts took over. Now, everything is multifunctional. But there was something beautiful about a room that existed just for noise, mess, and memory making. The name says it all, rumpus. No rules, just vibes. But even in the loudest house, you still needed a way to call the kids upstairs. And you will not believe how we used to do that. Furniture from thrift stores or curbside finds gave homes that mismatched charm only necessity could create. A sagging couch from someone else's garage sale. A wobbly coffee table rescued from the sidewalk. Chairs with mismatched legs or beds with slats that creaked under every turn. This was what made a living room feel lived in. There was no delivery truck, just a neighbor with a pickup, or a slow push down the block with a dolly borrowed from Uncle Joe. You sprayed it down, you wiped it twice, and you made it yours. Some pieces were covered in throws to hide the rips. Others leaned against the wall to stay upright. But they had character, stories, a past you never asked about. In kitchens, the table might have a burn mark or a dent from years of use, but it still held dinner. In bedrooms, dressers groaned when you pulled the drawers, but they closed eventually. New furniture was for people with money. For everyone else, you took what you could get, and you were thankful for it. Because when money was tight, having something, anything, to sit on was a win. You did not care how it looked. You cared that it worked. Phones in the 1970s were not private, not even close. They had cords, long spiral ones that stretched down hallways, wrapped around doors, and somehow always ended up tangled. Every house had one line, maybe two if you were fancy. That meant when the phone rang, it was anyone's guess who would answer and who would listen. If you were a kid trying to call a friend, you had to pass through a gauntlet of parents and siblings just to get 5 minutes of conversation. And if you were a teenager, good luck. Eavesdropping was practically a sport. Someone would quietly pick up another receiver and breathe like a horror movie villain. You would hear that subtle click and knew you were not alone. Get off the phone became a daily soundtrack, and heaven help you if someone else needed the line. I'm expecting a call meant you had to wrap it up, no matter what life-changing gossip you were in the middle of. There was no voicemail, no caller ID. If you missed a call, it was just gone. But if you wanted real independence as a kid, you had to earn it. And for many, that meant waking up while it was still dark, grabbing a heavy canvas bag and heading out into the cold. MTV in the 1980s was not just a channel, it was a movement. The second you heard that iconic, "I want my MTV," you knew you were about to step into another world. A world where music lived on your screen, not just your speakers. Where your favorite artist could become a visual legend. It played music videos, actual music videos, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That meant you could go from watching Cyndi Lauper dancing through city streets to seeing Michael Jackson turn into a werewolf without ever leaving your couch. Music became cinematic. Performances became stories. Seeing someone on TV who made you feel like you were not the only weirdo out there. And maybe, just maybe, being a weirdo was cool. MTV introduced you to bands you never heard of, genres you never explored, and visuals that burned into your brain like neon on wet pavement. You would tape videos, argue over countdowns, and swear that your favorite video was art. But when you got back to school, it was back to basics, and one look at your folder would say everything your mouth could not. It was the original shortcut for busy kitchens, long before microwaves or DoorDash deliveries. Right there in the wall, usually between the kitchen and dining room, was a little opening known as a pass-through window. Not big enough to walk through, just big enough to pass a steaming pot of mashed potatoes or a stack of plates. It was part convenience, part conversation starter, and part dinner-time drama stage. You could poke your head through and call out, "Who wants seconds?" Or you could slide a dish over without juggling it across the carpet. In bigger homes, they were framed out in wood or tile with little ledges to rest a casserole on. In smaller homes, they were purely functional, a hole in the wall that saved mom 10 steps at every meal. Some even had shutters or swinging doors, so you could close the kitchen once dinner was served. But eventually, open-concept living took over. People tore down the wall entirely instead of carving a window into it. And just like that, the pass-through became passé. Still, it had its charm. It turned dinner into a kind of performance. But if passing potatoes through a hole in the wall sounds odd, imagine burning your garbage in a machine tucked right next to the toilet. Limited access to cable television in the 1980s meant your world came through rabbit ears. You had the basics, network channels, maybe a grainy local station or two. But when friends talked about Nickelodeon, MTV, or the Disney Channel, you just smiled and nodded, pretending you knew what they meant. Your TV had an antenna wrapped in aluminum foil. Your Saturday mornings were for cartoons on the few channels that came in clear. You learned to adjust the rabbit ears just right, then sit perfectly still, because moving even an inch might send the screen back into static. You missed out on the cable exclusive shows, the big movie nights, the flashy channels with round-the-clock music videos. You got public access, reruns, and news that ended with the national anthem. At school, you heard about shows you never saw. You laughed along anyway. At home, you made the most of what you had. Limited channels meant fewer choices, but also fewer arguments. You watched whatever was on. You made it work. And you learned something strange. When there was only one option, it often became your favorite. The picture was not perfect, but it was yours. And sometimes, that was enough. Saturday mornings in the 1970s were sacred. You did not sleep in. You woke up early, grabbed the biggest bowl you could find, filled it with sugary cereal, and plopped down in front of the television. This was not just a casual routine. It was a ritual. You only had a few golden hours before the grown-up programs kicked in, and every second counted. The lineup? Legendary. Looney Tunes, Scooby-Doo, the Super Friends, the Jetsons. But nestled between the slapstick and sound effects were something sneakier: public service announcements. You would be watching Bugs Bunny one minute, and the next, a little cartoon light bulb wearing sneakers would hop on screen singing, "I'm just a Bill." Suddenly, you were learning about how laws were made and the importance of brushing your teeth, all while still chewing on marshmallow shapes. And somehow, it worked. Time for Timer told you about cheese and crackers. Schoolhouse Rock gave you grammar. These messages were as much a part of your childhood as the shows themselves. They blended right into the backdrop of your Saturday, like static in between the channels. You did not always understand them, but you remembered them. And as soon as you heard the first jingle in the distance, the real fun began. Because there was something coming that could get every kid off the couch in seconds. If one of these flashbacks made you laugh or cringe, do not forget to like, subscribe, and relive the weirdness with us all over again.